She woke with a gasp, disoriented. The darkness around her was thick, almost suffocating, as if it had a weight of its own. She blinked rapidly, trying to adjust her eyes to the dim light filtering through the heavy curtains. Her mind was a foggy mess, struggling to piece together the fragments of her memory. Cold sweat matted the unfamiliar silk pajamas against her skin. Where was she? This wasn't her room. The bed was too soft, the sheets too luxurious. She could feel the coolness of the silk clinging to her, a stark contrast to the heat radiating from her body. Her eyes darted around, taking in the opulent surroundings. The room was grand, almost palatial, with high ceilings and ornate decorations. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum in the silence. Each beat echoed in her ears, amplifying her growing panic. She could feel the blood rushing through her veins, a tidal wave of fear and confusion. Her breaths came in short, shallow gasps, as if the air itself was too thick to breathe. She scrambled out of the opulent four-poster bed, her bare feet sinking into a plush carpet. The softness underfoot was disorienting, a stark contrast to the hard, cold floors she was used to. She stumbled slightly, her legs feeling weak and unsteady. The room seemed to spin around her, the lavish furnishings blurring into a dizzying whirl. Panic swelled in her throat. It was a tangible thing, a lump that threatened to choke her. She swallowed hard, trying to push it down, but it only seemed to grow. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something familiar, something that would anchor her in this sea of confusion. The room was a stranger's sanctuary. Every detail, from the rich tapestries to the antique furniture, spoke of a life she didn't recognize. It was as if she had stepped into someone else's world, a world that was both beautiful and terrifying in its unfamiliarity. An antique vanity table held an assortment of expensive cosmetics. The bottles and jars were arranged meticulously, each one a testament to a life of luxury and indulgence. She reached out a trembling hand, touching the cool glass of a perfume bottle. The scent that wafted up was foreign, yet strangely comforting. A walk-in closet revealed rows of designer clothes, none of which she recognized. This wasn't her life. This wasn't her. The clothes were elegant, sophisticated, a far cry from the simple, practical wardrobe she was used to. She ran her fingers over the fabrics, feeling the smooth silk and soft cashmere. It was like touching a dream that wasn't hers. She rushed to the ornate, full-length mirror. Her breath hitched. The reflection that stared back at her was both familiar and alien. She leaned in closer, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The face in the mirror was hers, but it was different, changed in subtle ways that she couldn't quite comprehend. Staring back at her was a complete stranger. The eyes were the same, but there was a hardness to them, a depth of experience that she didn't recognize. Her hair, once a dull brown, was now a vibrant red, cascading in waves over her shoulders. She touched it tentatively, feeling the silky strands slip through her fingers. A young woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. Who was this woman? The question echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat that refused to be silenced. She searched the reflection for answers, but all she found was more confusion. The question clawed at her sanity. It was a gnawing, insistent thing, a parasite that burrowed deep into her mind. She pressed her hands to her temples, trying to block out the noise, but it only grew louder. Who was she? Where was she? And how had she ended up here? Fear, raw and consuming, washed over her. She was trapped in a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air growing thick and oppressive. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, suffocating her. Trapped in a stranger's life, in a stranger's body. And the worst part? The worst part was the nagging feeling that this wasn't the first time. It was a déjà vu, a sense of familiarity that made her skin crawl. She had been here before, in this room, in this body. But how? And why? She had a terrifying feeling this wasn't the first time. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a cold, creeping dread that settled in her bones. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill. She needed answers, but where would she find them? And more importantly, would she be ready to face the truth? Where or who she would be next? A different life, stripped of her own identity. The disorientation was overwhelming, a constant reminder of her lost sense of self. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by an unseen hand, her own desires and memories slipping further away with each passing day. The fear was a constant companion. It gnawed at her, a relentless presence that never let her rest. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every unfamiliar face a potential danger. She was trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. The terror of not knowing who she was, where she was, or why this was happening gnawed at her sanity. She questioned her reality, her mind teetering on the edge of madness. The constant shift in identities left her feeling fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that would never fit together. Where she was, or why this was happening, gnawed at her sanity. She tried to hold on to fragments of her true self, but they slipped through her fingers like sand. The more she struggled to remember, the more elusive her past became. She desperately clung to the hope that one day she would wake up in her own life, her own body. She dreamed of the day she would see her own reflection, recognize her own face, and feel the comfort of familiarity. It was this hope that kept her going, a fragile thread in the darkness. But that hope dwindled with each passing day. The longer she remained lost in this endless cycle, the more she feared she would never find her way back. Despair began to creep in, a cold, suffocating presence that threatened to extinguish her last spark of hope, replaced by a chilling certainty that something sinister was at play, something beyond her understanding. She felt like a pawn in a game she couldn't comprehend, manipulated by forces she couldn't see. The sense of being watched, of being controlled, grew stronger with each passing day. The only constant in this chaotic existence was the lurking presence she felt around her. It was a shadow that followed her from life to life, a dark specter that seemed to revel in her torment. She could feel its eyes on her, cold and unblinking, a silent witness to her suffering. A shadow, always watching, always following. It was a reminder that she was never truly alone, that her every move was being observed. The presence was a constant, oppressive weight, a reminder of the sinister force that held her captive in this endless nightmare. It started subtly, a fleeting glimpse of a tall, dark figure across the street, the rustle of leaves outside her window when no wind blew, a cold shiver down her spine when she was alone. Then, the signs became more blatant. A black crow, its eyes like obsidian beads, perched on her windowsill every morning. A single black rose left on her doorstep. Ominous symbols spray-painted on the walls outside her apartment building. Fear coiled in the pit of her stomach, a growing monster feeding on her terror. She was being stalked, hunted, but by whom? And why? The answer, she feared, would be more terrifying than the chase itself. Each life she inhabited ended the same way, in a brutal, bloody chase. The shadow always found her. No matter who she was, no matter where she hid, death followed. It was a macabre dance, a terrifying game of cat and mouse where she never knew the rules. All she knew was that she was the prey, and time was running out. She would run, her heart pounding, breath catching in her throat, the chilling laughter of her pursuer echoing behind her. The chase would culminate in a struggle, a desperate fight for survival, but it was always futile. The last thing she would see before the darkness consumed her was a pair of cold, calculating eyes devoid of any mercy. Each death brought a new awakening, a new body, a fresh wave of terror. But with each transformation, a terrifying truth began to dawn on her. The faces, the lives, they weren't random. They were all connected to her somehow. Friends from her past, colleagues, forgotten acquaintances, faces from old photographs. Was this some twisted punishment? Was she being forced to relive the lives of people she had wronged? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her. The more she remembered, the more convinced she became that the key to ending this nightmare lay in uncovering the secrets of her own past. Section 6. Fleeting bonds, lasting fear. The fear of her situation was amplified by the loneliness of it all. She couldn't confide in anyone, couldn't risk growing attached. Each relationship was ephemeral, cut short by the inevitable. The weight of her secret isolated her, making each new identity a curse rather than a reprieve. The terror in their eyes when they saw the fear in hers, the confusion when she flinched at shadows, it was unbearable. She was a ghost, haunting the lives of strangers, forever tethered to the specter of her own demise. And with each passing day, the hope of escape dwindled, replaced by a numbing despair. Section 7. Desperate measures. Driven by desperation, she tried to fight back. She learned self-defense, armed herself, even tried to lay traps for her pursuer. But he was always one step ahead, toying with her, herding her towards her inevitable end. Her attempts to outrun her fate only seemed to fuel her tormentor's perverse game. The more she struggled, the more relentless he became. Her once organized life, now a chaotic mess of borrowed identities and near-death experiences, offered no solace. She was adrift in a sea of fear with no land in sight. Section 8. A glimmer of recognition. Then, one day, it happened. A flicker of recognition in the eyes of her pursuer. It was a moment she had both feared and hoped for. A moment that could change everything. She had been running for so long, hiding in the shadows, trying to escape a past she couldn't fully remember. But now, in that brief instant, something shifted. The look in his eyes was unmistakable. He knew her. He knew who she really was, beyond the facade she had carefully constructed. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough. Enough to make her realize that her time was running out. She had to act fast, to piece together the fragments of her memory before it was too late. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, overwhelming and relentless. She couldn't afford to stay hidden any longer. She had to confront her past, no matter how painful it might be. He knew her. He knew her from her real life, the one she couldn't remember, the one that seemed like a distant dream, the life she had before everything went wrong, before she became a shadow of her former self. She had to dig deep to find the strength to face the truth that had been buried for so long, hidden beneath layers of fear and denial. Hope, like a phoenix, rose from the ashes of her despair. It was a fragile hope, but it was there, burning brightly in the darkness. She clung to it, letting it guide her through the maze of her memories. She had to believe that she could find a way out, that she could reclaim her life and her identity. The flicker of recognition in his eyes was a sign, a beacon of hope in the midst of her turmoil. If she could just hold on to that flicker of recognition, unravel the tangled threads of her past, maybe, just maybe, she could break free from this nightmare. She had to find the missing pieces, to put together the puzzle of her life. Every clue, every memory was a step closer to the truth. She couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. She had to be brave, to face the unknown with courage and determination. But she knew the stakes were higher than ever. The danger was real, and it was closing in on her. She could feel it, like a storm brewing on the horizon. She had to stay one step ahead, to outsmart her pursuer. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Her life depended on it. Her pursuer was no longer a faceless monster. He was someone she had known, someone she had wronged. The realization was like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and shaken. She had to confront him, to face the consequences of her actions. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, allies who could stand by her side. She had to find them, to build a network of support. It was the only way she could survive, and he was here to collect his due. The final confrontation was inevitable, a showdown that would determine her fate. She had to be ready, to face him with all the strength and courage she could muster. The battle for her life and her identity was about to begin. She couldn't afford to lose, not now, not ever. Section 9. A terrifying revelation. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. A forgotten childhood friend, a scorned lover, a business deal gone wrong. The faces of her victims, each one a ghost from her past, were coming back to haunt her. Then, as she stared at her reflection, a young woman with long, flowing black hair and haunted blue eyes, it hit her. The horrifying realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. The killer, the one who haunted her every waking moment, was someone she knew intimately, someone she trusted implicitly, someone who, in her heart of hearts, she knew she could never escape. Her own reflection stared back at her, a sinister smile playing on its lips.